Welcome to the University of Borås and to this important and interesting conference titled Transparency, the Must-Have Driver for Change. A special welcome, of course, to our speakers, panelists and guests from outside. My name is Björn Broström. I have the privilege to be Vice Chancellor at the University of Borås, and I will say a few words about our university to begin with and some words about this very interesting conference. University of Borås has a strong focus on sustainability. We strive to be the sustainable university with a focus on sustainability in our educational programs, a lot of research about sustainability and for sustainability, and a sustainable campus, a lovely campus, I must say, in terms of environmental and energy issues where we must act and think in a sustainable way. Agenda 2030, the United Nations 17 global goals for sustainability and global and local societal challenges are and will be starting points for many of our activities, and not least for our research programs and research activities. To deal with sustainability in a multidisciplinary way is a part of, or even the core, in the University of Borås' mission to have science for profession. One of our strengths at the university is the field of textile and fashion, and our Swedish School of Textile. Textile and fashion is, as you all know, an industrial sector of great importance to many, but with major challenges to be sustainable. These challenges deals with production, with distribution, with consumption, and it is a question about old and new materials and the use and reuse of scarce resources. Things that we must handle in a proper way. We are at the University of Borås and the Swedish School of Textiles engaged in several projects related to textile material development, new business models, redesign and reuse of textiles and apparels, and recycling of materials. A very essential aspect is the attitude towards the need of major changes. It is a question of being aware of the problem or the problems. An increasing awareness of challenges is the point of departure for important and necessary decisions and actions. Awareness is, of course, supported by transparency, the concept that is the core concept and the value for this conference. It is also supported by recording and reporting facts about development and situation. We must avoid denial, and we must avoid window dressing. We have, as a university, as a higher educational institution, a very important mission to describe and explain the situation, and to be a part of this kind of conference that we will handle and discuss these kind of questions. It will be very interesting and inspiring to listen to the presentations and discussion, and I am convinced that we will have some really fruitful hours together, and there will be a very interesting workshop to follow. So finally, I want to thank Simonetta, the initiator and the organizers of the conference, and once again welcome you all to University of Borås and this conference. And the stage is yours, Simonetta. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Björn. I think we should start the discussion right away because we got already the message. Awareness is the precondition of transparency, and transparency is the precondition of awareness. So I can just go home. No, but actually, there is another thing that I wanted to say, that I feel a little bit alone here on stage now in this very moment, because Björn, our colleague at the school, Jonas Larsson, was from the very beginning conceiving, this conference and organizing it. And as you imagine, it's a lot of work, to organize a conference. But he knew from the very beginning that he could have not be with us today. So very generous from him. And since, the conference is on video streaming and other hundreds of students are looking at it in another aula, I think that I want just to thank him. And wherever you are, Jonas, if you are looking at us, thank you. So, and of course, I thank you, because the fact that you are so many and I decided to invest a part of the so precious time that we have today for being here with us is the evidence that the theme, the topic that we are addressing today is very relevant. And the topic is transparency. And in the last decade, transparency, often paired with authenticity, has become one of the hottest topics in the public discussion. So why is it so hot? And I would like to tell you that the reason why, from my point of view as a psychologist, is because human beings, they tend always to talk the most about what they are lacking, what they are longing for, what they are missing. So you don't talk about your love relationship when you are in love, you just make love. You start talking about love with your partner when it gets into a crisis, when you feel it is lacking. Same, you start realizing, and once you get sick, that you have a body, and you talk about your organs and your functions, but you don't talk about that if you are healthy and young. So same happens with transparency. When so many disguising events occurred, and in such a tight rhythm as it happened in the textile sector in the last years, people get shaken and shocked, and one gets the feeling that the reality around us is opaque and deceiving, and people increasingly claim they are right to see what is happening backstage. And there is evidence that especially globalization rose the bar of the demand for trust based on transparency. So before framing what is the scope of today's discussion, I would like to remember very few, don't panic, cultural roots of the notion of transparency. So it was at the end of the 17th century when the notion of transparency started to be linked to society. In order to protect society from crimes, people and things should have got identified, surveyed, and controlled. And that was not by chance the time when cities started to get public lighting and when all information about crimes started to get registered. So the beginning of transparency as a form of social control was born. Further, in 1766, exactly here in Sweden, Anders Hunedius, Finnish priest and member of the Swedish Riksdag, set the rule that all the official decision as well as all the mail exchanges of the government had compulsorily to get registered and publicly accessible. And that was the beginning of the freedom of information, the freedom of press. In the late 18th century, the English architect and philosopher Jeremy Bentham made the famous statement that the most attentive we will be observed, the best we will behave. He is in fact the inventor of the famous panopticon, a penitential building that was designed in a way that allowed one single guard put at the middle of the space to keep under eye control the behavior of all the prisoners. And finally, in the modern times, the Austrian British philosopher of science, Karl Popper. In the Open Society and its enemies, an amazing democracy handbook that I suggest to read again in our times, he stated that any democracy theory same as any scientific theory, can be proven false. It can be fallacious, uncertain, full of mistakes, and only the external control can validate or falsify them. So let's stay here with Popper. Let us substitute the term democracy with the term sustainability. We know that same as science and democracy, also sustainability is not a perfect construct. Sustainability, all our sustainability efforts in gathering knowledge and designing solutions should be considered as a huge participatory project, as a laboratory where we continuously and jointly try to lay bare its scientific axioms. The sustainability-driven enterprise should be seen as a hands-on, interconnected global workshop where we can create tools that allow us to measure our sustainability efforts, but also improve them by constantly expose their flaws and the eventual leaks of our sustainability theories. So let's look in reality's eye. Sustainability, same as science and democracy, is a continuously self-correcting enterprise. But transparency is what allows us, as scientists, industry members, policymakers, and citizens, to join forces in that continuous attempt to perfect our sustainability goals. This pragmatic approach that sees transparency as a tool that allows us to continuously put under scrutiny our sustainability-driven actions and their resulting effects is the reason why academic realities as our school that are concretely engaged, as we heard from Björn, in the sustainability mission, decided to be active members of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. As some of you might remember, in 2009, Yvonne Chouinard, the legendary pioneer of environmentalism in the outdoor apparel business, was our keynote speaker at the Design of Prosperity conference. You can still, by the way, watch his inspiring speech at the TDP website. Shortly after, Patagonia asked us to help and support the initiative of the 21st Century Apparel Leadership Consortium. The template that I brought with me today of the letter we received was mind-blowing, since it was signed by Patagonia and Walmart. An oxymoron, a paradox at first sight. And the task was help collecting peers and companies from across the apparel, footwear, and textile sector, and together develop a universal approach to measuring sustainability performances. This is the initiative that gave birth to SAC, the industry organization which today represents nearly 40% of all clothing and footwear sold worldwide. There are actually three main reasons why our school is joining forces with SAC. The first one is that we consider the Higg Index developed by SAC members as the today available most holistic, freely downloadable self-assessment tool that allows the industry to measure in a unified, comparable, and verifiable way its own environmental and social impact at all levels of the supply chain. Second, we especially value the transparency goal of SAC, a goal that last year became an explicit transparency roadmap. SAC will see the 2020 as the final cutoff date for full public release of Higg Index data, and in between, before then, data will also be disclosed. On that, our colleagues of SAC will be more precise about that. But that's the thing, transparency was the goal from the very beginning. Third, we approve the openness of an industry organization that from the very beginning was allowing academic realities, NGOs, third parties to have a voice in the HIC index development. And that is based on the relational paradigm that transparency should guarantee. Transparency cannot be a monodirectional information stream defined and decided upstream. On the contrary, transparency should be a tool for opening a true communication among industry, policymakers, citizens, consumers, NGOs, third parties, you name them. In the theory of systems, the so-called retroactive feedback is what enables any open system to survive and develop thanks to the reiterative feedback with its external environment. So the industry system, same as any living organism, cannot survive and thrive without the exchange of the nourishment it gets from its external world, from its stakeholders. And this is why we are here today, dear friends and colleagues. We are here today in order to start building the needed, allow me to say, ecological relationship between stakeholders and the industry. And this is why from now on, starting from myself, we will stop any mono-directional ex cathedra communication and shift into a dialogue mode that we will keep for the whole morning. And please take note of what you will hear that rises in you, any question, doubt, comment, and be ready to interact with all our guests. And let's transform this space in what it is called, a marketplace. So an agora, where people don't only sell and buy, but also exchange food for thought. And I thank you for that. Doesn't matter. No, come on. Let's go. We have a little time today. Thank you. So it's my big pleasure, to now invite on stage for this first dialogue discussion that we will then open with you, with our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is an hero for me. Is really, the paradigm, best practice that I always bring as an evidence to our students and to the companies that we are working with, as the evidence that one can do, something paradigmatic different on in our societies and in our marketplace and business context. And Bruno Peters is actually, let me say, first of all, a fantastic designer, because this is the prerequisite if we are talking about fashion. He's a fantastic fashion stylist, very original, creating a new kind of aesthetics that is very desirable. But what makes him very different is also the way that he communicates, his ethos and aesthetics. But that's not all. What makes him so different is that he's giving the 100% transparency of what he's doing. For instance, yes, there is the material information. I will say, okay, he will say, made of wool, recycled, certified organic and responsible wool, couple of other information, which we usually give to our consumers because we say, this is only what the people care. No, people don't want to get overwhelmed by too many information about what we do. He's doing it in a way that is acribic, to the level of the garn, the level of the button, the level how, the button got covered, So here you have actually a gesture of generosity, because actually, here you have the ingredients of the recipe. What actually each one of us as a designer could, or design manager, could just copy and paste. But then that's not enough. It's all about the manufacturing details, telling exactly who and what, where, the product is made, in a way that, again, we can go and contact ourselves, these suppliers now is closed there. No risk of having any kind of competitive advantage being trespassed. The rules of competitive advantage here are not even to be seen. And then price calculation. This is the most amazing thing. Bruno is giving the 100% transparency of the true cost of every single, each garment that he is selling and putting on the marketplace for us to be bought. I would even say to be voted for, because these are really symbolic garments that have a density, of value that only Bruno Peters at the moment, is delivering to our sector as the best practice. And so now we have him here. And first I will have the privilege of having a discussion with him. But then, please, you are invited to be virtually sitting here with us in this nice vintage salotto and put all the questions that you think you want to put to Bruno. So let's applaud and welcome with an applause, Bruno. So, Bruno.
Thank you for the beautiful intro.
You deserve it. I was, honest and transparent about how I love, what you are doing. Bruno, yes, same as all the panelists, and at the end to you, we put two questions actually, that are in a way the over questions, of our conference today. It is, can we just shift back for a second to the slide that, is the why and the how. So it's why communicating transparency to consumers and all other societal and industry stakeholders is so crucial today. Each one of us should really think why. And how transparency communication should be conceived in order to become a true driver of change. And of course, Bruno gave his statement and his answer, but instead of just reading, since you are here, I would like just to elaborate on that.
On why?
The why and the how. Why is it so important, and how can it really become a tool for change, transparency?
Well, I think it's important to share what you're doing if you're proud of what you're doing. And to share that with your audience, I think it can only be a bonus. And I think at the same time it eliminates all questions that they might have about the product if you just put the information out there. And I believe more in informing your customer than educating your customer. I think it also puts you more at ease, I think, as a client. If you know exactly what you are buying, you might buy even more. So I think from a business point of view, that might also be interesting. And how to do it, we decided just to give the facts online in our own stores. We opened just a store now in Antwerp. We just display the clothing as in a regular store, and the customer can ask the salesperson the information that they want to know. And usually they don't, because they've already seen it online. So it's quite interesting to see how that goes. Yeah.
So you see, since they have been seeing it online, and online, do you know how much deeper do your customers really dig into the granularity of the information that you are giving them?
Well, some customers just trust us, and you see that they just buy the clothes, or they just love the design. And others go deep and read absolutely everything, or ask us even additional questions.
Wow.
Yeah. So we welcome that, and we learn from it as well to improve things. Yeah, it really depends on the person, on the customer, and it's at the beginning of this. I think 5 years ago when we launched it, people thought I was crazy, and that this was not a ridiculous thing to do, but they were doubting if in the industry they were doubting if this would ever happen. And what I liked about the conference from H&M yesterday or the day before was that it went from transparency is just this utopic idea that it's nice that you're doing it, but this is not going to happen. And 5 years later, the discussion was, it's happening. How are we going to proceed? What is the best way to convince other brands to do this? Because they are really making an effort, H&M. So that was, I think, a nice evolution to see in 5 years, that it went from being a crazy idea to something that is completely, yes, accepted, like this is the way forward, and how do we go forward?
Yeah, yeah. I see also
It's a
see
nice
this,
evolution.
it's a nice evolution, and you think 5 years is nothing. It's just
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, but I would like really, to put you a crucial question. Yet is, we are here talking about fashion, and there are so many myths about fashion not being the tool, for really doing something sustainably, because fashion is about being ephemeral and superficial and here and now, and who cares about the world? It's about me, myself, I. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think? Why do you think that fashion can be really a driver of transformational change?
Yeah. Well, about the fun part of fashion, I think that will always be important. And I think if the story behind the design is as beautiful as the design, then you can really have fun with fashion. And then there's no cloud anymore hanging above your head, or no guilt, because you know the story and you know it's a good story, so you can enjoy it even more. But at the same time, I think fashion is something people look up to. It's something people follow. And so I do think it's a great tool for change because of that, because it's something people want to adopt when they see it. So it can also be a business model or a way of working. And yeah, I think fashion is a good tool for change.
We have been hearing in the last 2 years a lot somebody talk about the dream and selling to the world at the end of the day, but especially to his voters, the renaissance of an old dream, the old American dream that we know is. We don't have to elaborate on that. We all know what I mean. And I want to ask you: is it possible to really think that fashion, same with other tools of communication that we have in society, can really contribute to the creation of a new dream, of an alternative dream, of giving to society, really something to aspire towards, that we buy into fashion? Do you think that we need? Because I know that one of the reasons why you were fed up of the fashion system that you were very successfully part of, I think that people know your biography and know, what you left behind by being such a successful fashion designer in the fashion system, and you were bored of the fact that fashion was always kind of selling a dream, But don't you think that we exactly have to start from there and regenerate a new dream?
And sell a new dream. Well, I think what I didn't like with selling the dream was more like selling an image or an old idea of a brand and a heritage that no longer exists, but still they are promoting that part, that history that is no longer there. They've changed the whole production system. They're basically not, you're not buying what they're selling you. They're selling you something, a dream, a tradition, a craftsmanship that no longer is as traditional as it used to be. So that was the part that I thought was dishonest or deceiving, and not necessary. Because what I would like to know when I buy something is, what are you doing today as a company? And that interests me more, even if it's not made in France anymore. Or I like to know what I'm buying now. And I think my dream is this dream um, of transparency, of just being truthful of what you're doing, just stating the facts. And I don't think I think that it's more and more appreciated. And I think in the end it will happen, because the truth is a universal. It's like a universal law. There is no way in escaping it. Sooner or later, whatever you try to hide or pretend, it will come up in your face. So I do think it will happen. It's just a matter of time. And I
What you're saying is already sounded to my ears like a dream, because one of the things that consumer lost completely, they report all the time, is really the understanding of the relationship between the price and the quality.
Mhm.
The price quality ratio is gone. Most of the people don't understand what is the true value of what they are buying. They know that the price is based on benchmarking, or all what has to do with marketing and pricing, positioning, and so. Have also started to also pronounce this word as if they were professional marketeers. They know better than marketeers what marketing is all about. So in your case, is by giving this price transparency on top of the transparency that you're giving of all the rest, that you are doing, is really bringing back this relationship.
Mhm.
The dream is, to enable people to still relate what they are buying, the real value and the real price, the real cost of what they are buying. And so, but another thing that I would like to discuss with you, uh, many companies, I think also in this room, would say, okay, but it's easy, to do something like that if you make it at the end, expensive.
Mhm.
And it's not affordable, it's not made for the many, So it's easy to be as transparent and clean and honest like you are, because you are positioning in a level that is even beyond premium. Is really, So, can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is this a myth or is this true?
Well, our prices are higher because of the quantities we have. We have very small quantities, sometimes just 20 pieces, because we are one store, and for one online store, 20 pieces per size, or depending on the style per look is a lot. But of course, it's not a lot for if you want big productions, or if you want democratic prices. But what's happening in the luxury industry is that sometimes they have the quantities. They sell some of these luxury brands have thousands of, or 10,000s, or millions of even of orders, and they still keep the price up like they would have made 20 pieces. And that's for image reasons. And that's something we didn't want to do. It's also our price evolves, or would evolve with the demand that there is. If we would sell more and grow, we will lower the prices organically. But I think that's something also a lot of people know, and where the trust issue comes up, and the doubts, because we have internet today, we have access to so much information. We know that the production has changed and that the pricing has not. It's still priced as if it was made in Italy or France and or Belgium, and it has moved to Vietnam or whatever, and then labeled, because the law still allows this to have it produced in Vietnam or any low-wage country, basically, and then have it still labeled made in Europe or France or whatever, any traditional manufacturing, any country with that are traditionally known for good manufacturing. So that's something I think conscious consumers or people who are informed struggle with. Um, and it's a small part, but it's growing. I think that part of the population is growing.
Yeah, this is the other important question, because another myth, or
But
anyway,
the other question
is
was,
that.
like, is it possible to do it in a less expensive way?
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is possible. I think even a mass market brand could do it. They could even pay their workers. I mean, like, what I would love to see is a mass market brand say, 1 year we will use our marketing budget, our advertising budget. We will not spend it on celebrities or fashion shows or any kind of events, and we'll just pay the workers more. That would be a great,
Marketing.
radical idea. So it is.
Yeah.
I think the customer doesn't always need to pay more for fair labor or for fair or better conditions or more. If you have less spend less on other things, it could be one of the solutions. But I think it is a thing that that you can see. If you see the amounts of profit that are still being made on these extremely low priced clothing, it is possible to have everything, the whole production process done in a better way.
So it deserves, in a way, a new design, a paradigmatically new design of the business
I think in the
rules,
future it will, yeah.
of the business allocation, of the investment. So redesign, in a way, kind of the business model.
Yeah, it will have. I mean, it also depends on the client. I think brands will never do anything that the customer doesn't want. But if there is a growing demand for transparency, for fair labor, for a clean product, they will provide, and that is the power of every one of us. And I think ultimately, we don't like to be considered just consumers, but that's how we act most of the time. We don't ask questions, we don't ask who, how, where, we just buy, we're just consumers. We think asking questions in a store is not cool, or it's embarrassing, or we believe that the people in the store are more important than us, so we don't ask who made it, or we believe something is expensive, so that automatically means it's good, which is not the case. But I think if we start asking more questions, things will change.
So, but you are really, an example of the maid behind the corner. Like, you are really, very much in favor of local production, and implicitly you already said it is because it's difficult to then buy the what already is the understanding of very low social and environmental standards that far away you might consider part of the supply chain. But if we really had the tool, the transparency tool, that guarantees, that a product made in the south of the world are, clean and fair, as we could ourselves control, around the corner by knowing in person the manufacturer, what would be bad about that?
I think what for me the problem and why I like to support local production or local businesses is because right now it's out of balance. Low-wage countries or certain countries are just doing so much of the production in the world that that businesses here are dying or in Europe are dying, and I think it's out of balance. I would like to see a greater balance returning to how the work is distributed. And that's for me the thing. I think right now it's so extremely noticeable that factories are closing, or really that all these crafts are dying in Europe or in the West. And I think that's something that I don't like to see happen.
Okay, in spite of that, in the textile business you have to source from the south of the world.
Of course.
From the very beginning of
Yes.
the history of textile, we can.
No, we have no cotton in
Yeah.
Europe, except maybe in Greece. But so we will always work together with other countries for our raw material, and there's only silk in China and India. So, but when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to all these things, you can.
Okay. So you are also using certification, yeah? And my question is, what is the reason why you look for some labels, some certification instead of others,
Mhm.
and would it be an enhancement, an augmentation, an increasement of your being so sustainably and ethically responsible, having an instrument like SAC is with the Higg index, is providing, that instead is really, the one certification that the industry agree that, when it comes to transparency, that is the
Yeah.
tool. Instead of because same for you as for the consumers, today there is a jungle of labels and certification and
Yes.
verification realities, and then you always ask, okay, what is the reality between that, behind that, who is verifying the verifiers,
Mhm.
and so on and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
forth.
yeah.
So I think, isn't even in your job, the need of having finally, the scope, the goal of having one instrument that when it comes to, raw material or finished material, you source from the south and also from our northern country, you can trust because there is the transparency behind.
Well, I don't know if we need one, but before we launched Honest Buy, we did the research. We checked all the certificates that exist, and we did what they mean and the standards that they have. And for us, when it comes to organic fabrics, we love the GOTS certificate, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard, which gets stricter and more difficult every year for suppliers to get. So it's not that it becomes more commercial because there's more demand for it. So it's a really, and it already addresses the labor who's working on in the fields, the chemicals they use, and so on. We've read all the demands that they have for suppliers, and it matches with what we thought would be good or is something we should all strive for. So we work mostly with those fabrics. And then you have a lot of variations on that certificate from other countries. Like in Japan, they have yoga, but it's basically the same thing. So if you start your research, it becomes clear quite fast. But then you have recycled fabrics which have no certificate, which is just something you have to dig into if it's just leftovers from the stock of the manufacturer or if it's really waste recycling. Um, it takes a little bit of research, but once you have all these things, it becomes a habit, and you can really work in a easy way. It's just at the beginning that it demands a bit of work, but it was worth it, I think.
Just the last question,
Yeah.
because I think that we want to open the discussion also
Yeah.
with the audience, is it a business model like the one of Honest Buy, replicable, scalable?
I think it is. I mean, it's just basically collecting your whole work method and communicating it with your customer. So it's just gathering information. It's a way of working. It's definitely doable for any company. And I saw when we were in Stockholm 2 days ago that H&M will do it as well for the material and the manufacturing for their new conscious collection. So that was good to see that they were adopting it. And the pricing is not there yet. And I think that's an important issue because in the price transparency, I had a conversation with, in 2012, when I launched the brand, with the International Labour Organization, who last year reported that 270 million children are working in fashion around the world. So I thought first they were mistaking, but that's because it's a huge number. So actually, child labor is more of a rule than an exception today in the industry. So also because they're working in all areas, you can, and once again, it has nothing to do with price, because you can have a 50,000 euro dress made in Paris, but the supplier of that really expensive fabric will often or never know who was working on the cotton field or in the silk farm in India or in China. So you can still have child labor involved even at that price point. It doesn't mean it's all bad, but it just means that if you work without those certificates, you have those risks. But what was the question again? I drifted away.
Replicable, scalable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is. If you just feel that there is a need for it, it will happen faster. But it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to keep you all for me. Let's open the discussion with the colleagues and friends and students that are here today. So, did you take note? Have you had something burning? Please. There are microphones ready for the one who is the first that raised the hand. Come on.
No questions.
Come on.
Then you have to ask more.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the first one.
Oh, hi, I'm a student from the Swedish School of Textiles, master. And I was wondering about how do you look upon kind of the gray area? Because for me, I try to read a lot, search a lot about how to work in a sustainable way, but there's always some contrast. I feel like it's very uncertain when to know when you are doing the right thing. Yeah. So how do you think about it?
As a designer, you mean, or as a customer?
As a designer, mostly.
Well, I think it's more important to be honest than perfect. So if you are if you have a collection and you would want to communicate everything with your customer and you have certain doubts about certain things or products, you could still communicate, this is what I have, and then they can make up their own mind. I think being perfect, you have to work with what's out there today. You can't, it's not your task to invent a new denim or a new, I don't know, polyester. So you have to work with the products or what's available. But there are more and more alternatives, more and more choices every day to have less questions, less gray areas. Also, if you work with, as a fashion designer, if you work with certified or suppliers that have certification, they are usually very proud that they have it, and they will usually answer all the questions that you have and be very transparent and open about it. That's the nice thing about working with those people. So.
Yeah, but for example, if you would work with organic materials, then a lot of the time the fireback is that then in the countries where they work with these organic plants, they will take away where there could be food for people. So how do you decide for yourself, kind of like, okay, I choose to work with this material instead of that? Like, where do you base that on?
I haven't heard of that, but yeah, I think that's up to you, what you find important, or if you have read something and you know the facts and you know this material in that country takes away the opportunity for other farmers to grow something that is eatable, or then that's something you have to decide yourself. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a very personal. I think every choice, the more you know, the better choices you can make. And I can't give you a general answer for that. It's just case by case, I guess.
Thank you.
There is somebody there, somebody there. First and second.
Thank you both for an interesting conversation. My name is Lars and I'm a PhD student here at the school. I wonder whatever you have noticed any difference in the interest from the consumers about those three parts that you have in your transparency. I mean the material, the manufacturing, or the price?
Like a free part?
Yeah, what the customers, your customers are interested more. Of the three,
What interests them
transparency.
most?
Yeah, the
I think
pricing.
the price.
Yeah.
The price is the ones that more talked about, more curious about. I think also because it's most mentioned in the press and everything, and because they like to know what they're buying, and it's understandable. Yeah. I'm the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and different,
Yeah.
totally different, and counterintuitive in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is a gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Tarun. I'm a PhD student at the Swedish School of Textiles. I'm working on a similar kind of project of implementing traceability in the value supply chain, the garment supply chain. The biggest concern which I noticed in the whole chain is that especially for the mass producing companies, that they have lot of stakeholder or the suppliers or agent-based supplying chain, where the agent is basically involved in sourcing of the product, and they actually deal with the manufacturer and all. Mm-hmm. And if we implement traceability or the transparency in the supply chain, there are certain information which can become public, and they don't want it to share it with everyone. Mm-hmm. It's a major concern they have. So how we can deal with that thing?
Well, I don't think that's. I think for me myself, if I would own that company and have that power, I would work with suppliers or subcontractors or that do want it to be made public. If that's my goal as a company, I would just choose somebody who doesn't have a problem with it. And it also happens very often when I have to make choices in the fabric that I choose one that I like, and then we ask them the information that we usually ask, and then they don't want to give it to us, or they think, oh, that's private or whatever. Then we just go with someone else. So, yeah. That's how I would do it. I don't know how to do it in general, but I think more and more of these things will change. I think the public, there is a growing amount of people who, that was one of the things that I learned at the H&M conference, that there is a small amount of customers who ask questions, who are interested in transparency, who really understand that every purchase you make has a consequence on your own life, on the world, on the whole planet, basically. But it's a minority. It's a small amount of people. But the reason why companies are also changing is because they understand that there is a lot of conversation about it, and that a lot of those companies are public or half public, and shareholders or investors or the people who take care of their wallet, they want to invest in safe companies. So if you fashion or large companies who produce in low-wage countries, if there's a scandal, if there's like something that happened with Nike in the 90s, where the company was almost bankrupt and the shares were almost worth nothing, they don't want that to happen. So the transparency gives, or if they see that they're working on transparency, working on sustainability, working on improvements, it's not always because they believe in it as a company and they would just want to do better, because even if their customers doesn't ask it, it's because their shareholders do care. They want safety. They want to know, okay, we're not going to have a scandal here. There's not going to be another Rana Plaza. So that was interesting, I think, that I learned.
Yeah, part of the risk
it's
management,
not just,
so to say.
Yeah, that it's there's a pressure from the customer, but there's also a pressure from shareholders.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was for me an optimistic news. That made me really optimistic for the future, that this is another reason to become transparent for them.
Okay. And plus, there is a lot also of awareness work that today is being done by NGOs, which are really,
Yeah. Yeah.
creating that kind of awareness.
Also,
And
yeah.
after Bruno, we will have Sara Ditti of Fashion Revolution, so we will be able also to dig into that
Yeah.
activistic. Okay, a last question, because our time unluckily is gone, but we hope that you will come again and again. What is here?
Okay, I got the last question. Thank you. And thank you, Bruno, for the amazing work that you're doing. My name is Josephine, and I used to be a fashion designer for many years, and now I don't know really what I am anymore. But I have a question for you. Do you consider yourself being a spiritual person? And if so, how do you think that affects your work?
I do, actually. I think it affected everything that I do. Like I said before, we don't like to be considered to be consumers, people who, my idea of my purpose in life is to become human, and I think human beings, they ask questions, they want to know who made it because they care. So my journey has been one from being a customer or a fashion designer towards becoming more of a human being. I think it's something we are ultimately supposed to do. It's not easy to be this kind and compassionate entity. It's how we describe ourselves in a dictionary, but it's definitely a mission. It's definitely a long way to go, and I wanted to apply it in every aspect of my life and also in my work, and Honest Buy came from that awareness. Yeah.
Thank
It's a good
so much.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, very short question. Of course, everybody knows why, at this point, we invited Bruno to be with us today. You are a guiding star for us. But what can we do for you? What are your expectations from us, starting from this morning, this conference?
Well, I think the fact that there are so many people here, as you said, is already a great sign. That there is interest, that people want to know what they can do or learn or get informed. And I think if that would continue, just continue what you're doing. I think that's the best thing you can do.
Thank you. So, Bruno, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And stay with us.
Yes.
Please. All right. Can we switch, Thomas? And now my great pleasure is to introduce you Sophie. Sophie Shop. She is at the SAC, the person that is really, I would say, herding cats, by bringing, this big, huge amount of members of SAC, to the goal, to our common goal of transparency. And she's doing it in a very charming and focused way. You will see right away, what a character, one has to have in order to make such a goal become true. So, Sophie, now I will pass over the stake to Sophie of the continuation of this discussion, open discussion. And we made an agreement, from now on, Sophie will be the one that will make all the brilliant, smart questions, and I will only do the stupid ones. Okay?
And I start sweating now because this introduction and the combination of, this big ask from Simonetta, who just did such a fantastic job on stage with Bruno. I just sent a social media message saying my two favorites were on stage together. This was a special moment for me personally. This means that I have to introduce myself as well, and that I have to introduce the questions that I'm going to ask myself. I'm just also trying to make this thing work. It's not. Simonetta, which...
Thomas, I think... she's doing it for you. So.
Yeah, I will receive a go. Well, then let's briefly introduce myself. I think I already had a brilliant introduction actually by Simonetta, who showed fantastic slides of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition I represent today, of the HIG Index. And yeah, I'm very excited that you have been involved from the beginning. Just to add a little bit to that, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is, as Simonetta explained, a coalition existing of around 40% of the entire industry today. That means we have 200 members, which might not sound as a huge amount, but it means also having members that are groups, umbrella groups from many different brands. It also means that those members, like H&M for example, invite their manufacturers to use the HIG Index. We also have manufacturers who join the HIG Index, so it's really a collaboration of brands, retailers, and a lot of other stakeholders, like the Swedish School of Textiles, many other academics, NGOs, civil society organizations, because we feel our work can only succeed if we collaborate. And collaboration means collaboration on improving conditions in the supply chain, both environmental and social. And how we do that is through our HIG Index. The HIG Index is our measurement tool to measure the performance of the members I've just explained to you shortly before. And the scale of this HIG Index is rapidly increasing. It's also enabling us to bring environmental and social together, to focus on the full picture. And that is, yeah, I think what makes it work, and why I'm so proud to be part of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, is that we collaborate in creating our tools, our measurements, and that we really do it together with the members of the coalition. Yeah, all right. So let me move on to the questions of the why and the how, because of course today that's the focus. And the why, I think, became already very evident. Why is also why we are all here, because you are all interested in transparency. You all feel that transparency is the next step forward, or at least you're interested because you are attending this conference. And actually we have a week full of conferences, events that focus on transparency only. And why we feel communication to consumers in particular, because that is the focus of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition primarily when we talk about transparency, is that the time is there. It has always been part of our DNA. You cannot be sustainable without telling what you do. As consumers or as the public, we have the right to know. But also, if you want to create accountability and if you want to stimulate progress, you have to know what you're talking about. And that can only be done by sharing this information. Our HIG Index is therefore built as a sort of social media system comparable to Facebook or LinkedIn. You can connect with your suppliers, with your peers, to see others' performance indications, to compare to your competitors. And in the future, and in the very near future, that will be to the consumers and to the greater public, to stakeholders. So the why is that this is just going hand in hand with sustainability. How? There's a lot to do about the how. First of all, we've created a phased approach, enabling our members to become transparent stepwise about their sustainability performance. We do that first on facilities levels. The brand level, of course, is crucial. As of 2019, all our members will be able to share their performance in a common and comparable way. And as of 2020, on product level. But we cannot do that by ourselves. We need that collaboration. We need those critical members to get to that point. And of course, therefore, I am so happy with people like Simonetta and the Swedish School of Textiles who have committed to collaboration on this field. And in case of Simonetta, that means that we actually spent a lot of days, a lot of phone calls, a lot of work on making this work, discussing this topic of transparency. It also means that my colleagues travel to Brussels a couple of times per week to make sure that we also align with political developments and asks. And it also means that we work together with NGOs. And in particular, NGOs focusing on this topic of transparency. And one best practice example, I have to say, who personally created my favorite sentence, knowing is caring, because that's what it's all about, is Sarah Ditty. And Sarah Ditty is and I have to press the button, yeah. Sarah Ditty is representing Fashion Revolution. You probably all know Fashion Revolution, and if not, you probably all know who has made my clothes. Let's figure that out. I welcome Sarah Ditty on stage. She is leading the policy work. You can come, please come up. And very important, you are creating the Transparency Index. And I think that's a very interesting one to learn more about. In your past, fantastic, there's so many things are happening around you when you just sit down, it's great. You have a long history of working in ethical fashion, for example, in the Ethical Fashion Forum. So you bring a lot to Fashion Revolution. Therefore, I'm very excited to hear from you why the time for communications is now. And of course, that doesn't only go for consumers, but also for stakeholders, and how that should be conceived. So, great, if you can start to update us quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. First of all, I always get a little nervous on stage, so please excuse me if I get a little shy. And also, sometimes I talk a lot, so please stop me if you have any questions.
I will. If I come closer, and if at some point I'm like this, you know that we have to continue.
So, yeah, I mean, how many of you in the audience have heard of Fashion Revolution before, taken part in previous years? That's quite a lot of you. That's exciting. So, I guess the why for us, I'll start with, is that transparency shines a light on issues that are often kept in the dark. So issues such as worker empowerment, gender equality, environmental sustainability, the true cost of what we purchase, as Bruno talked about, good working conditions, fair trade, and so on. And we really do believe that, though we focus on Fashion Revolution focuses on consumers, although we don't really like to refer to people as consumers, we like to refer to them as citizens. But we believe it's for the entire, transparency is for the entire value chain, so citizens right down to farmer level. And I think in that sense, we need to recognize that transparency is a journey, and it requires many kind of steps, which is what you kind of talked about over the last few days, although unfortunately I couldn't be in those discussions, and that it's going to take citizens and consumers in their role as consumers, brands and retailers, governments, and industry associations, and everybody, workers themselves as well, doing their part in taking action to achieve change. And so for Fashion Revolution, it's very important for us that we're engaging with all of these different stakeholders. So, and that's kind of why we call ourselves a pro-fashion protest, rather than the kind of name and shame approach, which we find isn't very solution focused. So we try to really engage in a more positive message, but also scrutinize not just brands, but ourselves, most importantly, in the decisions that we make. Transparency for Fashion Revolution ultimately means public disclosure. So brands and other industry stakeholders disclosing, their policies, their procedures, their goals and commitments, which are forward-thinking, their performance, most importantly, probably their performance and their progress and their real-world impacts on workers, on communities, and on the environment. And I think my kind of last point on transparency, to answer these questions, is that, like I said, it's not the end game. Transparency itself doesn't represent this sort of systemic structural paradigm change, to use Simonetta's word, that we'd like to see for the fashion industry, but it helps us get there. It's the first step. It helps reveal the structures that are in place so that we can better understand how to change them at every level.
I think that's very clear and amazing. Why do you think now is the time for this big call out? Because you achieve to reach fantastic amounts of people through your communications. So why now?
Well, I mean, I think Simonetta described it really well in her opening talk. I think that, you know, Rana Plaza really was a moment that people woke up. And that was really important for us as well when we came together as Fashion Revolution. It was really just a very organic coming together of like-minded friends and colleagues, that we used this terrible tragedy as a moment to spark a much wider ongoing conversation about the impacts of our clothes, and, you know, and to begin to ask these questions more, the who, the what, the how our clothes are made. And I think a lot of the people who are involved in Fashion Revolution came from a more creative background, marketeers, designers, young, digital-driven, millennial kind of people like myself, I guess. And I think that's what we saw. What was missing with some of the other NGOs is that no one's really having a very relevant conversation for the public about these things, other than some pioneering designers and some academics like Sandy's got some brilliant books that are really relevant. But but we needed to make it much wider, and I think that was what we saw as our power, is using social media, digital tools, design, exciting visuals to spark this conversation, and I think that it's really worked.
Definitely. Well, thank you. I think it's also an invitation, if you haven't visited the website and checked the web, do it, because it's really inspirational. And moving from your fantastic work and the index and the information you're sharing with consumers, it's nice to make the step to one example that is included. And that was referred to already by Bruno as well, and that's H&M. I would love to welcome you on stage, Hendrik Alpen. And I think I'm going to stand. I invite you to sit. It's very nice and cozy on this stage, as Simonetta already described. Of course, also for you, we have some questions. But first I want to quickly introduce you, because there's so many knowledge on the stage now. I don't want to hold that back from you. Hendrik already has 15 years of experience in the sustainability field. Actually, specifically also for H&M, where you worked in even many different countries and ended up in Stockholm. And what you told me today, Hendrik and myself work closely together, because we're also working under the umbrella of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. But today I learned that Hendrik was also the one who created, one by one, H&M's first supplier list that was shared on their website. So I was impressed by that, also because I know Hendrik is also very actively involved in the prize-winning sustainability reporting. So it's great to have you on stage, and from that perspective of communications and reaching out to the consumer, it will be really good to hear your why and how as well.
Yes, thanks so much, first of all, and lovely to be here. Amazing to see such a huge crowd actually on the topic. I think that there are actually many whys, and many really good whys to do it. One why I think is basically it's the right and good thing to do. Then there is a business case, I believe, to actually know your supply chain. And we heard the question before about agents and trying to lay some shadows on the supply chain. I think there is a genuine interest from any business to actually know your supply chain. Gives you better control. And even if you do not put it out there and make it public, you need to create that traceability in your supply chain for your own good. Then I think there's, for companies along the entire value chain, whichever player it is, but also for the greater public, a positive element that is accountability. So once information becomes public, there is a feeling or a stronger feeling of responsibility for the information that is out there. So yes, it creates accountability. But I think by the point where we can actually make this information comparable, better accessible, then we also enter stages of what I would maybe call positive competition. That might happen within companies already, where buyers might start, just friendly competing about getting better scores and better sustainability performance. But I think where it really becomes interesting, if we manage to not only put this information out there somehow to customers or citizens in general, but actually make it a place or give it a part in the marketplace. So if we can really manage to make sustainability performance information accessible and really relevant and inspiring for customers, then I think we have the opportunity to really create competition about sustainability performance and have a race to the top on the marketplace. And that then connected with transparency, I think for brands means a great opportunity to build or gain back trust that obviously, Bruno described it, can easily get lost or has gotten lost. But also really to make it a part of the product value. And I think Honest Buy is the amazing example of how far you can go, of making transparency part of your core DNA as a brand. I guess for H&M that would never go that far. But I think for any big brand, there's a great potential to make it an opportunity and build additional value to your product.
Thank you. I think that's very clarifying. I would love to actually already dive into the discussion, but we will save that because I'm first going to introduce all panelists. I think we should leave it for now and continue what you now started to mention as one of the first topics to discuss as when the panel is fully on stage. So thanks for that. I want to continue to introduce, and let's make sure this is aligned to, Professor Sandy Black. Now I really have to check my cards. That's great. Welcome on stage. I'll actually join you. It's so weird to be standing and then you're all sitting. Of course, well, you hardly deserve any introduction, I can tell by the applause. That's great. I go home and then we continue. Now, I'm very honored to have you on stage as well. There's so many years of fantastic experience, knowledge sharing here. I think you already made our lives a bit better by all the books you created. Eco Chic, for example. Yeah, I hope all of you have read it, but if not, go do that. And yeah, it's really a pioneer that's sitting beside me. You've been focusing on sustainability-driven design for so many years, and you are actually one of the first researchers in this field. Simonetta told me so many things about you in addition yesterday that I cannot even start to mention, but well, really, really, really an expert from the first hour, we can say. And I think part of the success of the stories and the information you share is also that you've experienced it all yourself. And from that perspective, it will be very interesting to hear your why and how before we go into the panel discussions.
Well, thank you so much, Simonetta and everybody, for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here. I have been here a few years ago, and it's lovely to be back. I'm going to read something, so bear with me. But just to say, as we all know, the clock is ticking towards irreversible climate change. We're the first generation that's become fully aware of our human impact on the planet, but perhaps the last that can do something about it. Transparency is a crucial element of understanding the complexities involved in creating contemporary textiles and fashion. But unlike the early trades in precious materials and spices and so on, by the time of the late 20th century and the relaxation of trading quotas, Our everyday clothes have now become much travelled items with very brief lives, as we know. And typically tracing the backstory of a UK high street dress might be distributed from Spain, having been sewn in Morocco, made with fabric dyed in Spain, but woven in China, from lyocell yarn spun in Egypt, from fibres produced in Austria, from eucalyptus trees grown across Europe, so on and so on and so on. Or a sweater from wool grown in Australia, and so on. And this is the same for all our clothing. And of course, when we've finished with it, maybe it might end up in Africa. That is, if we haven't thrown it in the bin, you know. So, but since the globalization of manufacturing sparked a race to the bottom, prices for fashion and clothing have continued to fall greatly, in sharp contrast to most other living costs. But to create full transparency, I believe education is needed at many levels for designers, buyers, marketing and senior company executives, consumers now, but also education of the next generation of designers and consumers and, you know, our children. But pioneer companies, as we've already heard, are beginning to be transparent with lists on the website. This is fantastic. But actually, maybe the consumer just wants to know whether it's a good or a bad product. Yeah. You know, that came up the other day. And I wrote in Eco Chic that some consumers think that clothes are born in the shop, or more accurately, perhaps they don't think about at all where their clothes come from. So we maybe have to sort of help there. But as the success of Fashion Revolution has shown, just by asking who made my clothes, consumers can be engaged enormously to make a difference, call to account, ask the questions. But of course, in the past, retailers, now it's a very different landscape, because retailers just used to have to put something in the shop and sell it. Now they have to be accountable and answerable. So that's not a bad thing, but it is a very big shift in the amount of things. But of course, fashion is one of the last craft-based industries, still working a lot with manual or manually operated machines, with skilled people and so on. And as people have said, we mustn't forget those people. And that's where Fashion Revolution really is raising awareness of the provenance and the crafted nature of clothes, and to realign those true values embedded in the product: conception, design, materials, manufacture, transportation, and even perhaps its water and energy input. I don't want to really frighten everybody, but you know, it does go very deep. But it isn't all doom and gloom. I really want to make sure that that's the message, because we must never lose sight of the expressive symbolic values of fashion, and let alone the employment that it creates. So the tricky task is to reconcile all of those different things and the people at the beginning of the value chain. Have I still got time?
No. But we would love to hear more, of course. But I think it's good to round up.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that design is a key catalyst. And, you know, I had my own business, you know, but I think how designers work, and I think the small and micro businesses, they can actually do a lot, as Bruno has shown, because they can have complete control. And I knew everybody who was making my clothes, and I paid them as much as I could possibly afford, which turned out to be a lot more than other people, I realized, because you know, that's the way it comes. But people can tell stories, and the narratives that they companies can put across, as well as Bruno. I would say people like Finisterre, who are telling some fantastic stories about their products, making films. They've also rescued a sheep breed completely. Go and have a look and see about the Beaumont sheep. Somebody like Christopher Raybon and so on. So my vision is that everything is sustainable and everything is transparent.
That's
really all, folks.
Yeah, well, I think we can really wrap it up, because this is fantastic words to end with, and also I think to start. But in order to start, we have one more, huge expert in this field, and I think she's making a very wonderful combination, and it's now the mystery guest still, but let's make sure she's not anymore. She is Sigrid Barnekoff, Program Director of Mistra Future Fashion, and you're making a nice link between the business and research, I think, to combine basically everything we've heard so far. And you bring 10 years of expertise in the business to Mistra Future Fashion, which is a research organization. So that's, you're putting it in practice, actually. you're making it practical. You have a big research team, but you also very well understand what's going on. So I'm very happy to have you on the stage as well. And I'm also very excited to ask you about the why and the how, and see how we can combine that business, that huge amount of business knowledge and your research focus today.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to tell to you who don't know what Mr. Future Fashion is, just to clarify a little bit more. It's a research program trying to enable a systemic change of the fashion industry, turning it into a sustainable fashion. And it's a big consortium that consists of 50 partners, where 12 are research institutes with different types of disciplines, works together with the industry, with representatives from the whole value chain, trying to address how do we shift this broken model that we are today talking about into a new model that will work and that is sustainable and circular. So transparency in this context is very, very crucial in order for us to define the new model. Because what we're lacking behind in this current model we're having now is we have lack of information. So what we do, our job when it comes to research, is to help the industry and all relevant stakeholders, such as us as citizens and consumers, but also governmental bodies and others, to have data and knowledge, new knowledge that can allow us to make the right decisions for the future. So that we know that the choices we do actually are sustainable and bring us further to the journey we are aiming to. So yes, it is our rights and our obligation to know about our products and what actions we can do. And in Mr. Future Fashion, we look at the whole value chain, at the system. And as you know, if you want to change this and want to find a new system, you know that you can't do it in isolation by certain one or few actors or in certain part of the value chain. You can't blame one. It's like tweaking different elements across the value chain. That's where you can enable a change, collaboration. Consumer power is massive here. So the more we know also, well, if we have transparency, we can be part of this movement and push the agenda forward. That's why transparency is so crucial. Transparency, though, means that we need to do an interpretation of it. We need to know what actually is good products, what are good alternatives. So at the end of the day, when we go to the shop or we buy online or whatever we do, we know that we will do a good choice. And that has to be a simple choice. It has to be a simple message for us as users and citizens of this world to understand how we can contribute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a clear and very focused link back to the questions we're asking. And of course, it's also linking very nicely to what it is you're focusing on and what you can provide, I think, because it's key insights into consumer responses to sustainability.
Yes.
And yeah.
So just a comment on that. Yes,
yeah,
because
please.
For instance, we are conducting comprehensive consumer studies across different countries. We're just going to publish that this year. That allows us to make better conclusions and recommendations on how to nudge us all into acting towards a more better, responsible way. We're also looking at new business models, how to assess those, how to nudge those into the market, providing guidelines to government so that they can affect their regulations and so on. And also, of course, looking at what is actually sustainable. When we talk about transparency, we also need to know, as I said before, what actually is sustainable. We do that interpretation and have an understanding of garments, if it is a good garment, is it a good fiber, what type of environmental and climate impact does it have, and so on. Because we're lacking that type of data today, which also makes it very tough for the industry to act transparent.
Well, and that's a clear invitation for further discussion, because lacking information, as we already linked it back to knowing is caring, is crucial if we talk about transparency, because transparency is based on that, about sharing information to the public, to everyone who's interested. And yeah, therefore it's great to have you on stage, all of you. Let's look into that a little bit more closely. We have discussed some questions and some discussion points. And I really want to start actually with something Bruno said in his talk, because you said it's already possible to do it at scale. It's actually nice to combine that with all of you say, but also Sandy, what you say. Transparency is here. Combining that with transparency being the buzzword, because we all use it, having different interpretations of the meaning of transparency, it will be really good to get a more solid understanding of how it can be a driver for change, and why it's not the standard yet, because it can already be done, it's possible. I think information is partly there, but we don't know it yet. How come? Why is it not the standard? Why are our businesses not based yet on transparency? And I'm looking at you. Of course, it will be good to hear an answer, and maybe we can just go. I would like to hear it from all of you, and of course, see potentially if there are any discrepancies in your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think it's linked to my comment before that it's been tough for the industry themselves due to that it's a complex supply chain. So when you want to have those questions asked, it's very tough to know at the end of the day what type of impact do you have on an environmental point of view. So that not having that data, that makes it also very difficult to talk about it, right? Unfortunately, if you don't have it and you can't share it, it's being perceived as something that is ignorant and you have something to hide. But it's also another aspect to it, and that is that if we want to talk about transparency and showcase who's done it and what it's made of and so on, the key point from the consumer point of view is to understand that it's a good choice, that it's a sustainable product. And assessing whether it's sustainable is not equal to that you have transparency. So that makes it also a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
May I ask you also something, Sigrid? Since the SAC, the Higg Index, has put itself really this very important task of creating, also with the support of science and NGOs, stakeholders, the criteria to put it all into a tool that is not just a tool, but at the end, can create the convergence in the gathering of all these data, which is the first step, because it's already, using the tool, the Higg Index tool allows businesses to know about their supply chain, to get themselves all these data, but in a way that is structured, that is based on scientific criteria, and already, giving them the picture, of their environmental and social footprint. And at that point, start to improve. So I'm not saying that Higg Index is the tool, but the need for the industry to have a tool that at least, gives to all of them the same criteria, to go and collect this data is already there. I mean, of course, we can all keep on incrementally improve it. We as scientists, I think, have this, because sustainability is not perfect construction, but I mean, we have already a tool at this point. And what is your approach, in terms of your program towards a tool like the Higg Index? What is your point of view about it?
Point of view of it?
Yeah.
I think that, just as you were pointing out, having one common tool enables and mobilize. And it's the same as my point with the consumer's role into this change, that if you use the power you have together collectively, we can make a change. And that is the same with the industry. So by having, the work you are doing, collecting industry and mobilizing efforts towards a journey that allows us to have better tools and better understanding and so on, that is really good, of course.
Because me as a consumer, I don't want to have too many. You just said
yeah,
that.
exactly.
I
and
want
the
at
point,
the end
yes.
to have one.
Sorry, I totally get it. Yeah, no, exactly. Because one of the things we were talking in the team before this meeting was that the importance of Higg Index in clarifying to us consumers in store how we can act better and making a better choice. So if we now want to have a movement by us consumers and create the demand for better goods, we also need to give them the tools. And having Higg Index or one label that kind of like summarizes it, instead of having tons of difference, which just creates a lot of confusion, it gives better, clearer guidance, we would say, towards the consumer to act in the way we want to.
So yeah, it's good that you all have something to say indeed, because I want to move it back, and I think it will be fantastic. Now you're fighting over the microphone. I think it's good to link back to Sandy first, because you were already hopping up when the question was asked, because you're absolutely right, and I'm also curious how that links back to the design phase.
Yes, I think the trouble, it's been very slow, very difficult. Because designers need to know the consequences of their choices, so that's the sort of part of the education of finding information. But they work under such constraints, whether you're an individual business, a sole designer, or you're working within a big company. You still have huge constraints of resources, time, money, and costs that you have to work to. So I think now that there's the beginning of this information might be very broadly available, that's going to really help a great deal. And I know that Bruno must have spent, your team must have spent a lot of time actually gathering that information in order to put it there right down to the swing tags and the tiny details, because those are the things people forget. But I just think it's often to do with just pragmatic difficulties and the pressures that this industry is such a pressured industry. And then we have changes that are made at the last minute by buying teams and so on that can affect things that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So it's complex, but I think Higg is the brilliant sort of big tool to begin to develop assistance for designers to work with.
Yeah, can just resonate what has been said already. I think one important point to make is when we look at the industry today, although there's still a lot more data needed, but there is a lot of data out there already. There's a quite big portion of transparency already out there, but as we've been saying here, it lacks the comparability and it lacks the accessibility. So I've been working at H&M with writing sustainability reports for 6 years. I love it. But can I ask you guys, how many of you have ever read a full sustainability report of any brand? Oh, damn.
Well, that's...
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, this is a good crowd to ask that question to.
Okay, just special. Okay, that kind of...
this will be the only room where you ever
ruins my lead over. But still, for the average consumer, I guess this is not the case. So we really need tools. And still, if you have read them, you can't say, is this company better than the other one? You get a lot of information, but you can't make the comparison. So I think the Higg Index provides an incredible possibility to shrink those, 125 pages into very, very easily digestible and understandable data that creates a comparability that we do not have today. And the other thing that I could see with that is actually this opening up for companies to be rewarded for good things, and transparency becoming a driver for rewards and opportunities, which in the past, to be honest, has not been the case. So even when we put out our supplier list, we had to face situations where we had to think, hey, was it really a smart move? Because it puts you more in the spotlight, and it means that you're more targeted by negative media coverage, by campaigns from campaign organizations that work differently than Fashion Evolution. What we hear a lot in the industry still is, maybe it's a nice thing to do, but is it still a stupid move? So I think when shifting the system as one of the many screws that we have to tie into the right direction, it is to build a base where actually transparency is a desirable state for a brand, and where it comes with more potentials for rewards if you do the right things in other screws than actual threats.
So building that system would also mean changing your existing systems into something that allows for transparency, or is that something you can integrate into the systems that you have today?
I think I think we also had the question if size actually matters. I think really for really small companies and really big companies, it's easy. Yeah. The information is there. It's tougher for the middle segment where there is a significant size in the supply chain, but resources might be tougher. I think, as I said before, at least as a big brand, you have a lot of information available.
Yeah.
I mean, we couldn't say that we could go all the way down to farm level yet, but it isn't I mean, no matter for even if there was not any pressure from Fashion Revolution, for example, there would be an internal driver to get that information. And we can go to almost tier, well, quite a far way into tier 2, even tier 3.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm interested in addition to what you what you say about does size matter, how and linking that to be rewarding. How do you see that? Because you can, be an important element of that reward for transparency.
Yeah, definitely. So Fashion Revolution is going now into its second year of publishing its Fashion Transparency Index. And this year we're looking at 100 of the biggest global fashion and apparel brands and retailers, H&M's included, of course. And we're simply looking at what information they're disclosing about policies and procedures, their commitments, governance, traceability. So are they publishing supplier lists? What information are they sharing about their assessment and remediation processes and also results? And then lastly, kind of driving a little bit deeper into a few spotlight issues, so living wages, unions and collective bargaining, and then efforts to kind of address the business model, so looking a little bit at circular resources, for example, investing in circular resources as one element of addressing the business model. And from our conversations, for sure, that size does matter. It really is there's one kind of mid-sized brand included in the Transparency Index because they wanted to be a part of it. And for them, it is, the feedback was that it's a bit of a different ballgame than the small players and the big players, like you just said. There's kind of almost more at stake because they do have some scale, especially in their manufacturers, but can be easily lose their leverage, or the competitive pressure is more stark for them than the big brands with way more resources and way more people, or the small brands who don't have the same fear of necessarily their competitor making the same product in the same factory. So that's a real issue. I don't know what the answer is totally. But my other point was through doing this research is really that if there's any sort of case made for the need for the Higg Index or a tool like that, it's definitely been this research. Brands describe what they're doing and report on what they're doing in so many different ways, using lots of different language, using lots of different measurements, and visuals, and for even the most conscious consumer, or even for people who are really knowledgeable, it's impenetrable. It's really hard to understand what brands are actually doing, and there's lots of fluffy language to get through. So I think a tool like the Higg Index as a consumer-facing tool is really needed.
So one common language actually in all practices is something we can conclude, because from the early stages of design to the end stage of sharing the information, one voice needs to be communicated in order to make it understandable.
Yeah. Can I just end with one point? I think the challenge will be to make that useful for more than just consumers as well, for the other side of the supply chain. So the producer side, who often aren't as educated as consumers in the West, or now increasingly the East, and also, English isn't their first language, and how do you make a tool that's really useful on that end as well to keep the entire system accountable?
Yeah, it would be great to hear, Sandy, your response to that, because you've been involved in all the stages of the supply chain just referred to.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think what I'm interested in is sort of more connections, even than there are at the moment, because I think the more that people are in the same room, because it's only recently that people in the sort of making the top level decisions in a company actually had any conception of what was going on the ground. And I mentioned farmers, people growing cotton or herding goats for cashmere. You know, they don't see any of the value of the product that finally ends up at the top end. But we don't want to ruin that, you know, it's still a delight to do that. But I think that it's so important that we've just got to get this openness and this acknowledgement of all of those stages, so that it's not hidden anymore. And I think the consumer-facing campaigns are helping that to mobilise that. But of course, all the work going on within the SAC, which is now, I think it's great that there's been so many companies collaborating that are really competitors of each other. But this is a bigger issue than anybody and any company.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel collaboration is really key in that. Not because I'm representing SAC, but because here you already see what's happening. We are all moving into a sort of shared direction of what transparency should mean, how it can be the standards. It's clear that we have some focus points like medium-sized companies, the design stages, the entire supply chain. Besides, I think the workers and the different steps in the supply chain, there's also a real big call out from governments now on transparency. So that's another actually link in the supply chain. And their call out actually focuses very much on product labeling. There are a lot of activities going on to discover and explore what legislation should look like that is really focused on this labeling. Do you think, if you think of a common language and one way of sharing information, that a label, for example, an ABCDE or a traffic light system, is indeed one of the specifics of such a common language? And is that also useful for the entire supply chain, moving from workers to consumers?
I think it would be brilliant. I think there might be some resistance. I do think that some companies have kept themselves very low profile in this because they're so scared. Nowadays, you know, there's very little place to hide, and so they are scared of saying the wrong thing. If they say something too small, then it'll show, even if they're doing a small amount, it'll show what they're not doing. So I think eventually that would be a brilliant system, whether it's ABCD in colours or light green to dark green, but nobody's going to want to be the sort of at the lower end. But I think that things are changing, and I think that we will get to something. That's my belief, but I don't think it's going to be easy.
And do you think that should be mandatory?
I do think legislation is. I think things happen. I think you need all of these things working together. So legislation is absolutely important to really sort of enforce certain things, and we've seen that in the textile industry and the chemicals that are used and so on. So that's really helped. I think that it's more complex in the consumer side, consumer-facing side.
But what about legislation is fundamental, is hygienic. We know that the end of the travel will have to go there. But legislation, policymakers are slow. And they move faster if there is really the push of the many people, because they have anyway they get elected by the people. So and this is the 2 point, how brands can really activate l'alliance with customers, with people, consumers, less citizens, in order to really create the momentum of, I would say, of an heroic first phase, of the momentum. That doesn't need to be right away mainstream, but very relevant. So it doesn't need to be a big movement, but a great movement, And this is actually what I think, that is the next step, of the collaboration between great brands, not just big ones, but great ones, and great movement, citizens part of great movements that are around, and that will actually push, into the mainstream, to move societies in that direction and accelerate the process of policymakers.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. And that's actually for the discussion, it's a total shame because everybody's, yeah, we agree. Because I'm sure there are also people who would say, let's, have mandatory legislation to do that push. But what you say here is let's have the push first. And that's what we're actually all engaged in. But later on during the questions, I would love to hear if people have different opinions about it, because I'm sure there will be different opinions. And you have also a remark about it, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty, I mean, maybe you can talk about this too, but I think mandatory legislation is pretty essential for brands who are already trying to do the right thing and struggle in a competitive market, because there's so many brands who are just doing virtually nothing. Yeah. And in that sense, legislation, rather than being like a straitjacket, is actually like a reward, because it helps the brands who do want to actually make a positive difference to do that in a friendlier market. And this is something that we're starting to dip our toes into, so to speak, as well, and encouraging citizens not to just ask brands who made my clothes, but policymakers who made my clothes as well. And they are listening. I mean, at least at the European level, there's going to be a vote. So if any of you can vote in European elections, you should write to your MPs immediately to urge them to support there's a plenary vote happening on the 27th of April where they'll pass a report that might lead to binding regulations for the garment industry, that with the aim of, hugely improving conditions. So please write to them, because that can have your voice has a really big impact in whether they vote to pass the report or not.
So, and that's a very clear invitation to all of us to take a first step. And that's also, unfortunately, we're already going towards the end of this first plenary discussion. But I think this calls for a broader invitation. I would love to hear, before we wrap this part up and go to your questions, because I'm sure you have many, what's the first key next step for transparency? You should go vote, we just hear, but there's probably other very clear elements. There's a huge call for supplier lists, for example. There's some other very clear calls. Maybe you can add to what you just said and mention one very specific thing, and then hand the microphone, because it would be wonderful to hear one specific element from all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from the brand side, for us, it's two things. We're pushing for brands to publish their supplier lists. That from our kind of stakeholder conversations is really an important first step. H&M is, of course, one of the brands. 31 out of 100 brands that we've just looked at are publishing supplier lists. And number two, to be answering when your customers ask you who made my clothes, to be answering that with specific information, not just your policies. And then for consumers, for us, it's just to continue asking these questions, and for us to try and wrangle more and more and more people into asking these questions, because obviously we need to hit a sort of critical mass, and we're not there yet. We talked about how it's a niche, and so for us, our job is to make this an even bigger conversation than it already is.
Great, thank you.
Lovely. Can I also get two?
Well, now you can. I cannot say anything against that, so go ahead, Stu.
So I would say, firstly, it's exactly that mechanism that you just described, Simonetta, on things like putting out supply lists. It was a couple of brands going ahead. It was not only H&M, there were a couple of other great brands doing the same thing. We can see it becoming more and more of a standard, but there we need to take that step of creating a level playing field, so that it doesn't create some kind of, competitive disconnection or, too big disadvantages. So lift the whole industry to that becoming a standard level, to then have other leaders again take the next step. And that for me is turning this information into something that is relevant for consumers and actually comparable, which to me means applying the Higg Index in a value chain, but also, and there I see a lot of work still needed, is to find actual ways that make this information relevant, accessible, easily digestible, and actually inspirational for consumers in the marketplace.
And is that a call for collaboration? Because hearing you, I think this is something you can only do together, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a lot of work going on to figure out how this could exactly look like and how this really works for consumers in how this could be designed. And actually, some of that is going to happen this afternoon, I guess.
Yep. Let's not focus on that. We have an ongoing discussion about what and how this is going to work. So indeed, this will not end today. This is something we have to continue. But before we do, Sandy, I would love to hear from you which one or two steps you can take.
Well, I do think it is, I definitely agree. We all have to become more conscious or even mindful, if you want to use the sort of buzzword, and asking the questions as consumers, but, because we're all consumers, but also encourage people within businesses to start those conversations if they're not already going on. And I think designers need to be more conscious designers and aware of their own the consequences of their decisions. So they have a unique position if they're in a larger company where they can talk both to the suppliers and the people producing, or start that conversation, and then they can also talk sort of more sort of upstream and talk to the people who are marketing and the sales people. So I think it's take your power and use it, really.
Take your power and use it. That will be my new tattoo. That's very strong. What can you add to that?
To increase the awareness around this. Second, make the design of the message interpreted for the consumer and make it easy so we understand it.
Thanks so much. This is a very clear call out. I would love to add many things to that as well, but of course that's not my role, but still I'm going to do it, because I think in this topic it's so crucial that we keep on discussing. And that doesn't only mean agreeing, it also means sharing where we disagree. And I therefore hope that after a small break we will have shortly, that there will be some people sharing some other thoughts. Of course, it will be perfect if not, but just speak up and let's make sure that we can also align in disagreement. Simonetta, do you have anything to add? Because I think we have to stop for a little bit, right? Because it's almost 12 o'clock.
How much time do we have now?
Yeah, my watch is
discussion.
This is your I think we have until we have 25 minutes, but we need to pause.
Oh no, I just would actually propose just to start, the discussion unless you don't have already questions, is to answer, to the two questions that we were also giving and putting to our panelists, It don't need to be questions, they can also be comments, suggestions, idea about the why and the how.
But we can be interrupted potentially, right? By a quick pause at 12 o'clock.
At 12:30 we are finished.
No, there was I think we will get a sign that at 12 o'clock there was a small ceremony.
Okay. No, but this is something else. It's not part of the program.
Okay, good. Well, then that was my misunderstanding.
We don't need to plan around that, Good. At 12 o'clock, we will, wherever we are, we will stop and we will all know why for a minute. Okay.
So that's in 2 minutes. So let's be quick with the first questions, and let's also split them up, because I think then it will be easier to answer them. And let's start with the why, indeed. Great. If you have remarks, questions, or other whys that needs to be addressed. There's microphone runners.
Okay, wait. Now it's true. No, I didn't get you, Sophie. You meant that now is the moment of...
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Is it working? Okay. I just want to ask you all to please join us in a minute of silence in memory of the students from Ängskolan in Skene, the tragic bus accident that happened this weekend. Our condolences go out to their classmates, their teachers, their friends, and of course their families. The minute of silence is going to start at 12 o'clock, so just a couple of more seconds.
Okay. Thank you all for doing this together with us. It's pretty weird to go back now to the questions, but I think this is exactly what we're going to do. I saw that you were doubting about raising your hand. Now you can actually start to raise your hand because, yeah, I'm sure you have some ideas about the why and the how, and I'm sure there's also microphones around, and if not, I will just...
One.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, my name is Andreas Edele from Germany. I work in the Secretariat of the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership in Germany involving government, brands, retailers, industry associations, NGOs, with the aim of improving sustainability conditions along the entire value chain. I have two comments and questions. One refers to the data that is being used to increase transparency. You've mentioned a lot of adjectives that this data, this information has to fulfill: easily accessible, comparable, and so on. I would like to highlight another one that I think is crucial, credibility. You all know that the auditing system that has been used for a long time by many brands and retailers, the ticking the box approach, has been heavily criticized. I have worked for 2.5 years in China in the area of CSR and have experienced what's going on in the auditing industry in terms of corruption and so on. You all know that Rana Plaza, one of the factories there, had been actually certified or audited and still happened. So I would like to hear your thoughts on the issue of how the credibility can be ensured. I think the HIC Index is a very important initiative, but I think the issue of credibility needs to get more attention. And the second point I would like to raise is the issue of
Can I ask you in between who you would like to answer the question? Is it
the
all of us?
H&M representative would be
okay.
interesting to hear.
Hendrik, maybe we can actually pause and start answering your question and then get back to the second one. Hendrik.
Yes, thanks for that question. Actually, we had a similar discussion yesterday, and there credibility was probably the most mentioned adjective. So, can totally agree to that. Credibility is essential to that, and I can also very much resonate your comment on moving away from standard auditing, where actually the HIG Index is a fantastic tool to do that, to actually achieve that. Because it means that where previously a factory maybe had to go through 20 audits, it ultimately can mean it uses one assessment tool. Then what comes on top of that is verification, and maybe some brands ask additional data, like impact data, not compliance data, which then again opens resources for working on the system change that we want to see. So what is happening when actually applying the HIG Index, and we do that in our entire supply chain, first tier, gradually also second tier, is that data gets verified, and you don't do like a 6-day head audit anymore, but you do the verification of the HIG Index data, which to some extent can be self-assessment from the factory, and then can be verified, for example, by a brand, as it is by now. But I know that is a system that, you know, in connection to actually putting data out to consumers, probably needs further shaping up in terms of securing the credibility of the data. I think in the first place, it is way better than previous audit data from companies, be it from external auditors or internal resources. Now it gets comparable actually between also factories, for example. Of course, we can see differences also between factories. That helps us in the beginning to see how, You know, is there a very advanced factory that doesn't need as much checkups maybe, or is there another factory that needs more help? Yeah, so it very much helps the shift away from the tick box approach, but putting it out to consumers and really creating a credible label will probably require additional elements of verification beyond brand checks.
Yeah, absolutely.
My take.
And also, of course, transparency is a means to make more credible information, because you need to provide that comparability element, and that's going to be crucial. So definitely the industry has to look into that, because this is the only way forward, by providing credible information. Sarah, you have something to add?
Just a quick point to add on to that. I think too, the fact that, I mean, that's why transparency of data is so important, because the fact that the data is going to be shared in the public sphere is a kind of a driver, and the fact that it could be contested is a driver to not falsify that information in the first place. So, I mean, obviously that's going to require people pulling you up on it, but there's a very real risk that that could happen, and that's a driver to put out, to report good data in the first place.
If I may add one more point, it also goes hand in hand with something that we are working on, is to drive industrial relations and actual collective bargaining, for example, into the supply chain. So there, which is the relevant place where wages, for example, should be negotiated to actually go up, and then again turn into legislation to create that minimum floors and, you know, take the next steps. But it's essential for that is, again, information, so that negotiation partners can negotiate based on a similar level of information. So there again, transparency comes in, checks and balances come in, and other actors come in to provide control, like, for example, the workers themselves and their representatives.
Yeah.
Because I understand this convergence between the sort of social issues and the materials issues is quite a recent initiative that is going on via the SAC, which I think is amazing, because it's really just, it's avoiding all that waste and all that sort of audit fatigue. If it's going to work, it could really produce something that is absolutely valuable, credible, and can move everything to a much and brings the voice of the workers into the picture, and not, which I think is the big ask of joining it all together. I'm doing this circularity.
Definitely. And I think in addition, it's good to go back to the question, and also in addition to what you just shared, hear from you how we can also look at this the other way around, because we're talking about credibility, about verified information, how this can work, what we can put together in terms of legislation. But I think the consumers themselves also have very clear ideas about it, right?
About, sorry?
What they feel is trustworthy information, and what we would need to include in that type of information.
Yeah, if it would be a policy or more common regulation about what type of labels we would have, of course that would have a more influence or impact for consumer. That is what I can say this month.
Great. That was a very extensive answer to your question, but there was another one. So let's look into the second one as well.
Yeah, I'll try to be short. I don't want to take so much time, but I have it's more a comment and a pledge than a question in terms of legislation. It's true, policymakers are slow, but as you know, there has been legislation, not sector-specific, but in terms of the Modern Slavery Act, for example, United Kingdom. In the Netherlands, there's a due diligence legislation on track for child labor, and it has been mentioned that on the EU level, the European Parliament, we don't know whether they're going to follow the recommendations of the Development Committee, but there are also thoughts on this. Congratulations to SAC that you placed the HIG index there. My point would be that from my experience, and it shows in the French have also adopted a due diligence law that has actually now been stopped by the Supreme Court because industry association went against it. So policymakers are slow, but specifically industry association, and we are here with very progressive brands, but there are others that have a lot of influence in terms of positioning of industry associations, both on national and European level, and they are the ones that do not want legislation at all. And they only want voluntary approaches. They don't want anything in trade agreements. And there would be my pledge to use your influence, H&M, the NGOs, universities, to help stop these industry associations playing such a negative role in this whole issue. Yeah, that's my pledge. Thanks.
Clear pledge. Anyone who wants to respond to this?
Yeah. Just a quick point. Definitely, we do that where we can. But another point is, I think, maybe an industry association would go to court against, some certain government ruling. A brand would not go against their customers in that sense. So that's where I think that, exactly as you explained before, market force has to play a vital role as well. And yeah, that's where a brand definitely might react in a different way.
So this is another call for collaboration. Yeah, Bruno, you want to add something? Yeah.
I was wondering if we know the brands who are in the industry association who are against it. We could make it, because it would be nice to make that public, to know these brands don't want this to happen.
Yeah,
at least in my conversation, because I've been going to some of these European level meetings, and SAC has as well, of course, but in my experience, it's the industry associations who represent more of the manufacturers than it is the brands who don't want these regulations. And I can appreciate that that's why size does matter, because often they represent kind of small to mid-size companies based in Europe who really do suffer from the brunt of having less resources than bigger players, and then having to deal with some of the regulatory kind of constraints. And I don't know what the solution is, but it's how can we influence? That's something maybe we should look at in future, is how can we kind of influence or wrangle those types of manufacturers and industry associations into the conversation as well, or at least connect them with the market force and consumers' growing desire for sustainability and transparency.
And I do think, to add to that, this is really a call for collaboration again and listening to each other, because it's not about blaming and naming and shaming a group of organizations or brands, or I do feel this should be a dialogue, a discussion, and yeah, I think that adds up to the key driver for the discussions we've had so far. There should be understanding, and there should also be an investment to understand each other, why certain elements are desirable, why others are not. And yeah, I think in that sense it's crucial to listen to each other and not to, for example, create legislation on the one hand without having been able to talk and discuss with a certain group of organizations. This is where I would like to leave it, but probably you have something to add here. Oh, that's great. You're just being a gentleman. That's fantastic. There's probably other questions in the room. Yes, I see one over there on the left. And question is actually not a good word. It's discussions. It's
input.
I'm Sarah, and I'm studying a business and design master. So my question is maybe more focused on business than transparency in general. And my question is that there is, as I feel it, more focus on like fast fashion, and maybe there is a bigger supply than a demand. So I'm wondering how the industry is looking at changing the mindset from the customer perspective into buying less but maybe pay more.
I guess that question goes to me.
A little bit, but also for like everyone. Is
Happy
this
to pass it
something
on.
that you research or?
So, I mean, one thing we have to, or we can say, obviously, we can see that as a company thinking long term, resources, for example, are they are simply limited. So what Sigrid described before, this entire system change, finding the screws towards a completely circular model, and actually we as a company have committed to moving to a 100% circular model, is really, really essential, but it's absolutely no easy game, and we do not have all the answers today. And what I also have to say, and what we have to be realistic about, is that we're operating in a market environment. So we sometimes get the question, can't you just double the prices, produce half the quantities, therefore pay double the price to your suppliers, and that would end up in the pocket of workers? If it was that simple, it would have happened yesterday. It's unfortunately not. So we are in a competitive environment. Systems have to change, and that means all actors involved. So yes, it can be that some leading brands go one step into the right direction, then some others follow. That builds a critical mass. Then legislation can follow. Certain standards can be applied. Then something happens and it goes one step back. Then a new innovation comes into place that can kick off and scale certain things. But for all of that, there still needs to be the market in place, the consumer needs to be with us, and it's not, or it's an illusion to think that, for example, price wouldn't matter. So that's why I think it's so important to find these tools that can create a competition, or that can create a ground floor, and then I think that's maybe the legislator's role, to make sure that the floor has no cracks, so that it doesn't open up for the race to the bottom, but that from these floors we can develop tools that in the marketplace, in the consumer, in the purchasing process of the consumer, can create opportunities for the race to the top. And that is a gradual process. That is nothing that is either black or white or happens from today to tomorrow, but it's an evolution, and I think we're at the point where we can build the systems to foster that evolution, and we can see it happening. It's going to take some time, and it's not as simple as that, unfortunately, but we can definitely see the transformation.
And we have one more, one more question and one more response.
Just a different type of answer, but I was triggered by the thought of transparency in business, and it's easily when we talk sustainability that we focus on here. We don't take into account the time horizon. So we talk about now versus long term, for instance. And transparency for me is also about us as consumers knowing. I mean, the mean to having transparency is that when I go and buy something, I know that it's a good product. I know that it's sustainable. But there are other options as well. I mean, we tend to talk about new items, new garments, but acting as a consumer, buying something that is pre-owned, i.e. second-hand, or I'm renting or leasing, that is also a sustainable act. And that is also transparency, that we as consumers understand that is sustainable actions. And today, that is not a common understanding among us. We don't act like that. So when we start to push for those type of more alternatives that are sustainable, i.e. more pre-owned items available, and we start to ask for that, we see more new business models will arise. And then there will be a shift. And the existing companies also, they are aware of this. They are integrating new business models into their operations as well, because they know that we are asking for it. But it's still early days.
Before we make a very quick remark, then we do the last question, because we unfortunately already have to start thinking about wrapping up.
We talk about this question, I'll try and be quick. We talk about this question a lot at Fashion Revolution, and I think from what Henrik said, we can see that fast fashion isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and so that's kind of why we at Fashion Revolution have chosen to take a sort of three-pronged approach, and that's one, while we have a capitalist system and fast fashion is going to exist and interact with the market, we should try and push to improve it. Two, we need to be educating people that they probably need less and should pay more. And three, that there are alternative ways, and we like to celebrate and showcase those through Fashion Revolution's communications and platform about we call them alternatives, but you know, the renting, the buying, the swapping, etc. So it's got to come from all angles, I think, to really cause that systemic change.
So you will, and we all will, because we're all consumers, we will get more information about the opportunity and the possibilities for making sustainable choices. Your question, I think, yeah.
Okay, I feel a bit greedy getting the last question again, but I'm thankful. It's a bit of a philosophical question for all of you. In this bright future, post-system change, where fashion people are all mindful and all the products are sustainable and fair, and where pricing is transparent and quality-based, and everybody are more or less working Bruno style, how do you think that will affect our human society and the way we interact, and how will the brands compete with each other? And is there a tipping point?
You ask so many questions in one question.
Sorry.
I think
she's putting a scenario and asking,
yeah.
given this holy world has become true.
Yeah. What happens after when the system change is all done? I mean, it could be as big as ending the slave system or something. What do you see in this bright future?
Great question.
Brilliant question.
May I say something right away, because this is my field. If that holy world would be realized, that would mean that actually we have already stepped into a completely new phase of our civilization. I mean, I don't know for whom remember 2006, Design of Prosperity. You know, we were we were having Jeremy Rifkin, and you know, he was talking about the next industrial revolution, Europe being a laboratory of new models of prosperity. But then he wrote another book, which was the empathy civilization. Okay? And it was really putting it in this way. Either at this point of our civilization understand, you know, really empathically that the solution is going in, you know, for the good, and doing good by doing well, or doing well by doing good, because of a pragmatic approach, because of understanding that this is the only way out from the too complex catastrophic situation in which globally we are stuck at the moment. Because the other way is we don't exist anymore. No? So I mean, this is exactly the, you know, and then, you know, I don't know if I'm going to see that world, but I'm sure that for our children, the children of the children, it would be their reality, it will be their present, and they will start again to tackle with problems, find solutions, you know, and go towards the next step of our civilization. But it's true that today we are at the moment of, you know, either we go in that direction, we become really civil, honest, decent people, or, you know, the world is keeping in another direction that I don't. That's the dark side. We don't want to be dark today.
All right. And you wanted to add something, because you were also hopping.
Well, I mean, I can't. This is a big, hard question, but
yeah,
you know, is there a post-utopia society? I mean, we're still working with sort of, is there a post-growth society? So, you know, I applaud that question, because I think it does tell us where we've got to get to, but we really have to try and find a sweet spot where the majority of these things are happening. But it's a multiplicity, and we've all got to act, and we've all got to, you know, be conscious, I think. So no, I don't have a big answer to that, but I think it was a great question.
And I think we all have to act. Act is a good way to, unfortunately, end the discussion. Of course, not before we have thanks. First of all, you all. Applause for being here today with us. And before thanking the panelists, I think it will be wonderful if, like, after this fantastic description of the future and where this should go, an invitation to all of us to wrap up in one word, saying what you take out from this discussion, to give a little bit of inspiration, and then I will hand over back to Simonetta to wrap up this fantastic conference. So maybe you would like to go first, Sigrid.
I would just say we will just continue. Really.
Continue.
Inspired to keep on the journey.
Great.
Yes, I do. I think it's just keep on going, be conscious, and be optimistic.
Right. One
One
word is
word,
really my
yeah.
thing. I would say take what's already there, scale it up, take the next step, and move up.
That's a beautiful last one word.
I think I would go with power. Whatever your role or your power is within the fashion arena, to use it in whatever way that you can to make a positive difference.
Great.
Okay. Wrapping up is difficult. I mean, I can just share with you the fact that, having had a morning like this makes me happy, but also gives me a lot of frustration because I would like to stay here with you and create little groups and, and workshop for the whole days, to come, in order to, to all kind of make this change become true. On the other side, I think that we are already a community. Every time that we send you a message like we are going to join WAP, now we are all collecting together. So I hope that the school, myself, and our friends here, our colleagues, will enable us to create in the future something that brings us again together, with probably another format that will enable us to be, all of us, the change makers, that we understand today we need to be. Okay? So it's the promise to do something so that we meet again. What I can do as a only wrap up, of this day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also on my behalf. It was an honor and a pleasure to partner up with the Swedish School of Textiles and with you, and to have this wonderful panel and the discussion to talk to all of you. So thanks so much, and let's stick to the fantastic one words and the invitations that were shared today, and let's meet again, and I hope I can be there as well.
You will.